Hi, welcome. I'm Nigel Southway, an industrialist, a manufacturing consultant, and author of the book Take Back Manufacturing, an imperative for Western economies. I'm going to provide my views on how Canada can restore its industrial base and how we should respond to the latest trade issues between the USA and Canada. Due to globalization, the Canadian manufacturing contribution to our economy continues to decline and now stands at well below 10% of GDP, and it used to be about 25% in the early 1980s. Our domestic share of what we make, mine, and grow for ourselves has decreased by more than 25%. Imports from offshore market nations is now 15% of our GDP, and imports from many emerging nations are now more than twice the value of our exports to them. Now, we've offshored a lot of our manufacturing using modern supply chain technology, but what gets forgotten is that a high percentage of our white-collar jobs have also been offshored due to computer networking technology. And we continue to import far too much manufactured products and services that could be done here, with no firm plans to fix the problem. And the outcome is a huge decline in all of the economic metrics, with significant loss in prosperity. Prosperity? It's bad, and it's easy to confirm. In 1980, a young professional could buy a detached family house for twice a single salary. It's now more than 10 times a single salary. A new car purchased in 1980 was less than 25% of a single salary, and now it's almost equal to a single salary. University education in 1980 was affordable and could be supported by working a casual part-time job between the semesters. Now students exit the educational system with significant student debt. Also, we now have a citizen population that is far more underemployed than 45 years ago, with our youth struggling with double-digit unemployment. So in about two generations, we've seen at least a 300% decline in personal prosperity in Canada. Let's talk about the trade relationship between USA and Canada. It's a huge mess. The leaders of the US and Canada are not even on the same planet. The US president presented at Davos that he will follow a nationalistic economic framework emphasizing protectionism, deregulation, and using tariffs to drive a reindustrialization, reshore critical industries, and create more local supply chains. The Canadian Prime Minister also presented at Davos, and his strategy for increasing Canadian prosperity is via accelerating major infrastructure projects, undertaking a green energy transformation, and diversifying trade to be far less dependent on US trade and become far more dependent on global trade using multilateral relationships. The current USMCA agreement is up for review, and the Canadian leader is walking away from the negotiation table and away from the promise made to his public to review and close a deal with the USA that is 75% of our exports and 25% of our GDP. The US administration is watching all this, and while their own policy goals are to fix the past problems of uncontrolled global trade, they see Canada going in completely the opposite direction, confirming just how misaligned the two nations are on trade policy. So we're going to need a far more aligned discussion. So I fear that these actions made by our Canadian leadership will make the US far less interested in even discussing, let alone negotiating, a USMCA style trade deal, and could justify the US dissolving the USMCA and just administering tariffs across the board on all trade with Canada. And it's estimated that without the USMCA, our GDP will drop by 10%, with a lot of that capacity and jobs going stateside. The current special tariffs already in effect on steel and aluminum will force the eradication of the auto tooling sector, and quickly after that, the whole auto sector in Canada. And this is a harsh example of what every business will experience without the USMCA. So Carney's plan to replace the U.S. trade is to increase foreign resource exports by 300%. But Based on our track record, it's hard to believe we can provide the political will to avoid our massive bureaucracy and build the infrastructure anytime soon to scale up resource exports by 300%, even if such future foreign demand actually exists. And it's clear such resource-based export trade will attract the need to reciprocate by accepting even more high value-added imports from these global trade partners that will further disadvantage our national prosperity with further trade imbalance and job loss. Not a good plan. The only viable plan is to join a new USMCA that will operate as a true trade bloc that does not just encourage trade between member nations as in a free trade agreement, but enforces and controls trade compliance such that any imports or exports outside of the trade bloc zone is firmly discouraged with significant tariffs that will also force reshoring of economic activity back into the trade bloc. And any external trade exceptions would be planned and agreed between the trade bloc partners to maximize prosperity inside the trade bloc. Now, we can also work at solving any concerns about Canadian sovereignty while partnering with the US to build the most powerful trade bloc on the planet. If we joined this North American trade bloc, we would have the combined capability and leverage to better manage the global trade environment, and together have total trade compliance and reshore at least 75% of our collective foreign imports. This would provide an extra $2 trillion that we could share in local value-adding economic activity inside our trade bloc. And tell me why we would not want to share in such a trade bloc with the US that has a GDP per capita that is 50% larger, an average citizen income that is 40% higher, and living costs almost 50% less than we have in Canada. Look, we have the opportunity to not only improve our living standards, but have access to increased business investment that is sadly lacking in our current Canadian economy. We already see the Canadian trade uncertainty and lost opportunity driving individuals, our businesses, and even provinces to consider relocating to the USA. My vote is simple. Let's stop walking away from a North American trade bloc economy and stop the nonsense talk about joining the EU and stop running around the globe hooking up and making dangerous deals with undesirable trade partners. Let's stop with the elbows and let's stop the destructive rhetoric from both sides and stop pandering to the virtue signaling of national sovereignty. We must get far more practical, and although there will be challenges, it's worth reviewing how to become part of a North American trade bloc rather than being exposed to the uncertainties and insecurities of the wealth-draining global economy. I recommend we even consider holding a national referendum on doing what it takes to join such a strong North American trade bloc by direct partnering with the largest economy on the planet who live right next door. My TBM book is available on Amazon in 3 formats, and the TBM website at www.nigelsouthway.org has many video presentations and articles, and it's linked to my Substack site. And thanks for listening.